Welcome back, folks, to this week's episode. Coming up, Wayne Power and Gary O'Hare caught up with Y'all man Eddie Sullivan. Hear Eddie's Six Nations and World Cups campaign stories from his time as Irish and rugby union coach. A huge honour to catch up with Eddie and have him with us on the extended panel.
Welcome back to the second part of the extended panel. Joining us tonight, we have former Ireland international rugby coach Eddie O'Sullivan. Eddie, thanks a million for taking the time to come on our show and to share with us some of your knowledge within the game of rugby and to have a look back over some of your career.
No problem, lads. Looking forward to it.
Also joining me tonight, I have friend and colleague of the extended panel, Gary O'Hare. Gary, you're very welcome to tonight's episode, and I know as a rugby player and coach, you must be extremely excited with tonight's guest.
Cheers, Wayne. Great to have Eddie on the show with us this evening. Really looking forward to this interview now.
Yeah.
Hope you feel the same at the end, lads.
I'll be brilliant.
Go on, let's go then. Let's go.
I suppose as we get started, so Eddie, as we enter phase 2 in the current climate, which is COVID-19, things are starting to return to a bit of normality. But how have you been finding it during this time?
That's very weird because, you know, there's no real sport on, and I love sport, and wherever still there's no rugby on, you know. So it's kind of, you can only watch the best moments of any sport for 10 days, and then you've seen them so many times. So, yeah, it's a weird old time, you know, but I think hopefully things will open up, but I think there's a lot of problems ahead. Having said that, whether it's rugby or soccer or whatever, everyone's got their problems. There's the whole problem around managing the COVID-19. We still don't know where we are with that. We try, and then there's the whole, I think it's a huge financial disaster at the moment looming for rugby, which has got a fairly dysfunctional financial model around the world anyway, is even in more trouble, I think, than some other things, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's very difficult times ahead, and with the current climate, that's for sure. But look, we'll make the most of it as we're slowly getting back to normality anyway. So just to start off, so you're from Youghal originally, Eddie, a beautiful seaside resort town in Cork. Could you tell us a bit about your time there, from playing rugby and also being involved in the GAA during your youth?
Well, I grew up in Youghal, in Dominic Collins, right when I was just right in the middle of the town, and there was a really young estate where we all lived. There was lots of kids, I'd say, under the age of probably 10 even at the time when I moved in there, because it was a new estate. And there was a green area nearby, which was turned out, now there's two green areas. One was now a car park, and the other, Youghal carpets built on it. But we used to play soccer there for hours and hours and hours every night. It would be like 30 aside, like, it was great crack, you know. And so I grew up like that, you know. We played a bit of GAA, and I was lucky in Youghal, they had the rugby club, and there was a guy called Brendan Kelly and a guy called Brendan Murphy, and they were in the Hogan brothers, that they started an underage section in Youghal rugby. Because I went to the CBS in Youghal, which was really no rugby, it was a GAA school. So I ended up rugby. My uncles played it in Youghal Rugby Club, and then they started an underage section, which is very unusual for you know, a country town to have an underage section. Like, there was no mini rugby back then. I mean, my first game of under 10 rugby would have been 15 aside, like full on, you know, 8 in the scrums and like full on. Like myself and my brother used to play against each other and train at hooker. We'd beat the lard out of each other, you know. And we'd go home then, and my mother, we would carry on at home. My mother had to get the coach, Brendan Murphy, to change our position. So he put him to scrum half and me to out half, and that's where we ended up playing for a good while. But I grew up like anybody else in town, but I had a kind of an affection with rugby because my uncles played it, and I used to go and watch you all playing on the weekends and stuff. And it was funny, they changed, and there's a famous pub restaurant in York called the Heron Seafood Bar, and they had showers out the back of that, and they would change there in the change rooms, and then we'd go up the hill to Frogmore, and myself and my brother Kieran, we'd be putting the boot of a car, like, because we wouldn't get any room in the cars, like, and because there was no change rooms in the club, like, so it was fairly basic stuff, you know. Yeah. But so I played Gaelic football, I played soccer, but I ended up kind of focusing on rugby because I got banned from playing Gaelic, because back in the day, historically, you couldn't play foreign sports like if you played GAA. So I think I was about 10 at the time, and I played a soccer match for Youghal down in Lismore on a Sunday, and another lad and myself, we were called into the principal's office in the CBS Monday morning. He said to us, "Did you play a soccer match yesterday?" Sure, naively enough, we said yes. So we were banned from playing in the football leagues in the school, you know. So even then, like, it was gas, you know. So I kind of gravitated to rugby then. So it's strange enough. But that's how I kind of followed rugby more than anything. But I still love playing Gaelic and soccer, you know. But rugby would have been my first love then, you know.
Yes, that's incredible. Eddie, when you your days in Thomond College where you were studying PE, was that always the career option you wanted to go within sport?
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, we hadn't a lot of career guidance in the CBS and all. There was a cardboard box on the window with a lot of I suppose that they were basically piece of paper telling you where you could go if you want to study, you know, architecture, if you want to study this, if you want to study that. So there was no career guidance teacher. So I remember rooting through it one day, and I was a PE course in a place called Thomond College, which is now UL, obviously. Back then it was Thomond College, and I applied for it, and I was lucky to get in. Now, at that time, it was a very small college, only about 200 students. They took 50 students a year. It was a 4-year course, and it was hard to get into it. You had to get pretty good leaving cert, and then you had to do an interview, and there was all sorts of physical tests and everything. So I managed to squeak through on that, and that's how I ended up. But the funny thing about that is you were a teacher. You're always going to be a teacher, though, once you won there. You know, if you went to UCC and you did whatever, you did art, you didn't know whether you were going to be a teacher or not. But once you went at home, and you're always going to be a teacher. So I knew that, and I wanted to be a teacher, and I wanted to teach sports. So it was a great combination for me. So that's how I ended up going in that particular direction.
Oh, brilliant. And while you were there, you also played for Gary Owen during that period. Can you give us some insight into how big club rugby in Limerick was during them times? Like, I'd often look back and see pictures from those days.
Yeah.
Attendance was unbelievable compared to now. Like,
yeah, well, you see, I was playing in Youghal. I used to go home every weekend and play in Youghal, but a guy who was in college with me at the time was Tony Ward. He was a couple of years ahead of me in college, and I got to know him, and we played a few games for the college together on a Wednesday afternoon, like friendly games and stuff. And he brought me out to Gary Owen at the end of the season for a sevens tournament, and I played really well, and the club asked me to join. So I remember telling you all at the start of my 97 or 78, 79 season that I was going to join Gary Owen, and they were delighted. Like, they saw that as a promotion for me. So I went to Gary Owen, but there's no All-Ireland League then. There was no AIL. It was just club rugby. And you could only, you know, it's weird to think about it, but you could end up with probably a maximum of 6 or 7 competitive games a year. Like, there was the Munster Senior League, and you played, I think, 3 or 4 matches in that, and then you were in the final or you weren't. And then the Munster Senior Cup was the other big tournament, and it depended where if you got knocked out in the first round, that was the end of your season. So your rugby season could be over at the end of February, you know, if you're knocked out in the first round. So there was no AIL, but for whatever reason, Gary Owen always had a good footprint in rugby in Limerick, and Shannon had got very strong, and young Munsters had got very strong. And Cork Com were probably the torch carriers in Cork, you know. So the Munster Senior Cup was a big deal back then. I remember playing, and particularly if 2 Limerick teams went at it. So it wouldn't be unusual to play a Munster Senior Cup match in Thomond Park. They were always playing in either Thomond Park or Musgrave Park. And you'd easily have 5,000 or 6,000 pushed in there, you know. And that's the old stadium now where 5,000 or 6,000 was pretty much topped out, you know. So, yeah, Limerick was always that kind of interest in the game. It was the first sport in the city. Now, Limerick hurling was important. I mean, I think Limerick City is a sporting town, if you think about it. They had a League of Ireland soccer team. They had a pretty decent hurling team always historically. Even if they haven't won a lot over the last 30 years, they've always had a footprint in hurling. And then rugby, obviously. And then when the IL kicked off, the Limerick and Munster teams, in fairness, embraced it. And a lot of the Dublin teams, you know, didn't get it for a few years. So I think for the first, I don't know how many years, 7, 8, 9, 10 years of the IL, the IL never left Munster. Like, Cork Con won a few of them, Gary Owen won a few, Shannon won a few. But funny thing about your season then is when you weren't playing, we say in the Munster Senior League, which was only a handful of games, or the Munster Senior Cup, all your other fixtures were friendlies outside the province. So you'd play teams like Lansdowne, Wanderers, Ballymena, Bangor, you know, you play Galwegians, and every year you'd have a fixture, and every other year, like, you play them at home this year, play them away the next year. So that's how the game went that time. But even in that time when it was very amateur and, you know, very little coverage, except in the newspapers, Limerick rugby was very strong, and that's probably what stood Limerick in the AIL. And I would say categorically that when Munster started to come strong at the very start, you know, of the professional era, it was built on the strength of the Munster teams in the AIL, like the Shannons. If you look at Shannon and Cork Con and Gary Owen, they were all supplying, and young Munster supplying players into the national team. at the time, and Munster were basically built on, mainly those teams in Munster. So if you think about it, the AIL was the foundation of Munster rugby, getting to where it is today, whether you like it or not.
Yeah, and just do you ever think, Eddie, that the All-Ireland League will get as big as what it was in those times? Like, the quality of the game is excellent now.
Unfortunately, that ship has sailed. I remember I was coaching Blackrock College in the 90s, and I remember the AIL was the only show in town. I remember Sky Sports showed our game live one Saturday from Stradbrook, and it was shown all over Europe. If you could watch it anywhere. And we played young Munsters who I think at that stage may have had won the IL at that stage, or were really a strong team. They had about 5 or 6 in the Munster team, and it was huge. Like it was a big deal. I remember going to Shannon one day for an AIL match in Towan Park, and there was about 7,000 at the game, and it really was. But once the game went professional, because back then clubs used to get reasonably decent. Like, I remember I coached Buccaneers as well when the AIL was pretty big, and remember the Buccaneers had Bus Ireland on their jersey, or was it? Yeah, it was the Irish bus company, and there was a row one time because there was so many different companies wanted to get on the Buccaneers jersey because they were getting so much exposure. But once the game went professional, all that sponsorship money moved up into the professional game, and the clubs really just kind of got left in the dust. And the IL then became less and less important. It was downgraded, really. And I remember one time I was assistant coach to Ireland, and this is as recently as 2000, going to see Gervin Dempsey play for Terranure on a Sunday, coming back from an injury. And the decision whether he'd play for Ireland the next weekend was based on that. So even then, you're talking 20 years ago, the IL had a footprint. But, the game has left it behind. And I think the RFU made a strategic decision as well, that the clubs weren't that important in the professional game, and they built the academies, built everything around the academies. I think that was a mistake, and they're still trying to wrestle with that whole thing of the interface between the club and the professional game, and they haven't solved it yet. But I think that was a mistake 20 years ago. They should have kept the clubs more directly involved and connected with the game. But I think, the IL has struggled now. I don't think it'll ever come back. But they could breathe some life into it if they could integrate it in some way as a connect between the professional game and with the academies and stuff. But it needs to be more formalised. So I wouldn't say it's over yet, but it's on life support for a while now.
Yeah, no, I agree totally. So just moving on, Eddie, in 1992 you worked as a fitness advisor to Kieran Fitzgerald for the senior squad. We know how important strength and conditioning is nowadays in sport, but what did that role entail back then? Was it gym-based? Was it pitch-based? Can you just give us an insight into that?
Well, historically, if you go back to, I worked up until the 99 World Cup, and I did a tour to New Zealand in 92 as well. So I've been working with the RFU as a development officer in 88, but I had a particular interest in fitness because I've obviously my PE background. So I wrote a book for the RFU on basic training for rugby, get involved in the weights program and also kind of interval training and stuff. So Kieran Fitzgerald was the under-20s coach at the time, and I used to help him as a development officer. And when he went up to the Ireland coach job, he brought me with him, and he wanted me to be the fitness advisor. Now, we're talking then about all the players are amateur, and the truth of the matter was that a lot of them were afraid of weight training. The general opinion was weight training was bad for you, it slowed you down. There's all sorts of nonsense out there. So I was kind of the first guy tasked with trying to get guys into weight training. So in the build up to the 91 World Cup, I basically spent my time traveling around, basically, I suppose, managing guys one-on-one, trying to get them all into their proper weight training. And we went to the World Cup in 91, and I saw a clip, it's some anniversary of Gordon Hamilton's try that we only beat Australia. Of course, we gave up a try straight away after and lost the game. But our fitness that time was pretty decent. But it was actually trying to get the whole culture to change about strength training, and diet was the other thing, because guys get all the wrong food. And there was a lot of there was nothing like the information or even the research that's gone in since then. So we were just trying to break through that to get guys to think positively about training. And the stuff guys do now, obviously they're professionals, like that. It's miles and miles and miles away from where we were back then. But you had to start somewhere, I guess,
Yeah, no, brilliant. And Just like yourself, Declan Kidney and Joe Schmidt were all qualified teachers. In what way have the skills you gained as a teacher probably helped your coaching career? Would they have a positive impact? Or
Oh yeah, so I've no doubt it's a huge advantage if you're a teacher, particularly if you're a PE teacher, because coaching is really teaching. You know, you're trying to get people to do things better, and you're trying to help them to do it. So you're basically giving them information. And particularly if you have a PE degree, it's even better because you've spent your time learning how to teach skills, you know. But yeah, the whole process of teaching is effectively another name for coaching. So I would say, without a shadow of a doubt, you'll find there's more than me. I think Graham Henry was a teacher. I think Warren Gatlin used to teach. You know, there's a plethora of guys who were teachers who eventually became coaches. So I think that's no accident in that. That's and probably a very high correlation. So I think, yeah, teaching certainly gives you an advantage in that, in learning how to pass on information, how to build pedagogies. And if you have a PE background, it's even bigger advantage, I think.
So, Eddie, I suppose you've had 2 spells in of coaching with the USA Eagles, a team which has shown significant improvement in recent times. This must have been an extremely exciting opportunity for you to work with a national team which were on the rise, and for you to be able to implement your coaching philosophy with them. What was the whole experience like for you over there?
Well, I have 2 spells there, as you mentioned. One was in the late 90s where I went out and worked as assistant coach with the US national team. And I had a second job as well, which was I was a technical director and I ran coaching clinics. So, and both things happened. It was a seasonal job. So I was able to come home in the winter and coach the Buccaneers, which was pretty good in terms of my learning to coach. But take the Eagles side of it, I was assistant coach and I coached the forwards for the Eagles for the 99 World Cup. And for me, I had an epiphany there about coaching, because in America, coaching has been going on for like 100 years. It's a really highly developed skill, coaching, and they revere their coaches in America. They keep them in very high regard. Yeah. But most kids in America would come through a system where they've had professional coaches, like literally in school, in college, whatever. And their systems of coaching are different than ours, although we're adapting them more. Like they have specialist coaches, which we're beginning to have now. Players are very good. They are taking on information from a number of different people. Like my first kind of light bulb moment, I was over in Cal Berkeley watching the football team training, and they were doing a drill where they had a snap and a throw, a passing play, and then it stopped. There was nothing after. It was just a setup. But when they made the snap and they threw the ball, and it was complete or it wasn't, it was like 10 whistles went off and 10 coaches around it instead of coaching like crazy, which is very much kind of not what we do here, because everyone's saying, oh, one voice at a time, you know. And I remember talking to the Eagles coach, Jack Clark, who taught me a lot about coaching, is that when you have a coach, you have a limited time frame to work in. You don't have all day. You've got most sessions last 90 minutes or, you know, an hour and 3/4. And you've got to get as much information across the players as you can in that time. And if you're going to faff about and everyone has to take their turn, you're wasting time. You could be doing reps. So American players are very good at listening to different people talking to them about different things, which means that you can accelerate the learning curve. You can get more information. And at time in rugby, we didn't have that. When I get back to Ireland, we had 2 coaches, like myself and Warren Gatlin. I was the assistant. That was it. We had a manager, we had a doctor, we had a physio, and kind of outside that, you'd have to think with him. Like it was kind of low key really, and it was professional. I remember the first thing I did when I became coach is we went from a staff of about 5 or 6 to a staff of 15, and that wasn't just to have more people around, because we got a kicking coach, we got a defence coach, we got a forwards coach, we got a skills coach for the break. Like we just built our team. And the idea is that you take the athlete and you give them the best chance they can have to perform at the peak of their ability every time. And you're constantly doing that. And the only way to do that is to get lots of information to them quickly, and you need specialised people to do that. So the guy who had started that before me, to his credit, has been Clive Woodward. He saw that as well. So Clive was introducing that. He was the first guy to put a defence coach into England. So they're all American concepts of having specialist coaches who focus on one area and are ultra efficient at delivering information to a player in that area. And the other thing was video analysis. Like actually, I was lucky. I had a guy called Mervyn Murphy who worked with me for years and still worked for Ireland up to recently. I think he might have finished after the World Cup. And we built a capacity to measure players' performances based on their moments, and we give players feedback, and we could And that all goes into sports psychology then, because you can set goals, performance goals based on that information. So what you were doing really is trying to give guys the best chance to get the best performance of their lives every time they play it. And that's what American sport does. It's very good at refining what's necessary. So I learned the whole principle of that in America. And then I tried to bring that into rugby in my own domain. I tried to build it where I was coaching. And so, yeah, America had a huge influence on me. That was back in 99. So when I came back to Ireland, now when I went back, and my second ideation was for the World Cup in 2011. I went back in 2009, and I was a head coach. Probably again in America, it's a different situation. You're talking about all amateur players, and really nothing. When I was the assistant coach in '99, and you fast forward, 10 or 11 years, nothing had changed in America. You still had amateur players. You had a handful of guys playing in England or wherever in France, but most of them were guys holding down jobs, and some of them put their life on hold to go to the World Cup. Like they didn't take career jobs; they just worked. And then when they came to camp, they took time off. Some of them had families, and they paid a per diem for coming to camp, but they had no salary coming in. And then when you went to go to a World Cup, that was their goal. And then when the World Cup was over, they probably retired and went on with their lives. These are all amateur guys. So the thing that struck me about America as well, these guys were incredibly easy to coach. They were so hungry, and they were very, very easy to motivate. They wanted to perform as the best they could for their country. So the one advantage you had when you played a professional team was, well, the disadvantage that you weren't professional, but you had was these guys were just so hungry to perform for their country and to do the best they could, and they were so easy to coach. So that was completely different. And you didn't. All my staff were part-timers. They lived in parts of America. So it was just. But I knew. I have to say, my experience in '99 meant that I went into 2009 with a much clearer picture of what was required. I didn't have any. I mean, Scott Johnson was the coach before me, but he was only coach for 6 months because I think his head almost exploded when he went in there, coming from a fully professional operation, that he found it very hard to adapt. I knew going in what I was facing, so I was equipped from my previous experience. But I loved it because it was so different, and the energy was so good there, and these guys were so motivated. They were fantastic guys to work with. I loved working with them, but it was a different thing. And I must say, yeah, I wouldn't give that experience away for anything on both of them in the 90s, and because it formed my coaching philosophy. And in 2009, that to work for that World Cup was brilliant. I really enjoyed it.
I suppose you just kind of mentioned it there a minute ago, Eddie, about being technical director while you're in USA as well. How much added, I suppose, demands did that put on your position? Do you know, while you were over there? Like was it a very busy schedule? Yeah,
it was. No, it was seasonal work. So you work from kind of April right through to September, and it was very busy. But what you were doing effectively is, and at the time I'd work with George Hook for some of that, because what we were trying to do was build a coaching program in the US. So that was about educating coaches. So you flew into a different city every weekend, you ran a clinic, and we built up what they call a level 1, level 2, level 3 coaching standards. And people came, and again, it's such an unusual. I remember giving a coaching clinic in Dallas once, and I flew into Dallas on a Friday. You'd usually get in there lunchtime. Then you'd have a theory session on a Friday night. And then on Saturday, you'd do theory. You'd be on the field on Saturday afternoon. And then Sunday, you'd do Sunday morning again. And then people would go back home. And I remember talking to a guy who'd come, and he had driven from Los Angeles to Dallas. So he was been in a car for 4 days to come to the clinic because he just wanted to get his coaching badge. And I said, geez, that's a lot of pressure on me to make sure he didn't waste his time, Yeah. So that was the kind of commitment you came across. And that was a different job. And I really enjoyed that as well. We're kind of building a coach accreditation system that they needed so that people could come and learn. And the thing about America was that it's changed now to an extent, but a lot of people that would play rugby, especially the men, they would have played NFL or played football in high school. And they pick up a lot of bad habits in contact. They habitually put their head in front in the tackle because that's how you tackle in football with your helmet. Put your helmet in front.
Yeah.
So one of the things we had to put a lot of time into was teaching people how to tackle properly, so they weren't going to get their bell rung every time they made a tackle. Yeah. And then the other one was that they would have guys taken up. See, guys only usually took up rugby, and there is high school rugby, but it's not that widespread. But so a lot of guys would take up rugby in college. So they're 19, 20, never been in a scrum before. So when you're coaching coaches to coach them. So we had to do a lot of safety work. It's how do you teach somebody what to do when a scrum collapses? most guys that you see scrummaging for a club in Ireland, they've been playing since they were 10 or 11.
Yeah.
So the experience is huge. Like, you're getting guys who've never played before. They're in a scrum, 8 aside, and the scrum is going to collapse, and they need to know how not to just going to put them at risk. So there were other things that you had to worry about. But again, look, it was that was part of the job, and I really enjoyed that part of it, because again, I guess running coach connect, you're being a teacher again. You're teaching teachers this time. So that was brilliant. But again, the commitment of people to come, give up their weekend, to be there, to learn, I found it fantastic. Yeah. So you felt the pressure was to make sure they didn't waste their weekend coming to listen to you talking for 3 days, you know.
Yeah.
Eddie, just in terms of the World Cup, like when you were coaching, how would you have planned for it? Was it much like a 4-year cycle building up to the World Cup, or was it very much a couple of months before, see where you are and just go to the World Cup?
Well, it's not. There isn't kind of one plan, as I say. Like, there's multiple plans. Like, there's an overarching plan about planning your squad. How are we going to get some depth into the squad, or where are we weak? So that goes on over 3 or 4 years. Like, you come out of a World Cup, you start looking, projecting down the road, and saying 4 years time, who's going to be around still? So if you've got a tight head prop who's 35, it's very unlikely he'll be around in 4 years time. So you got to start thinking, where's the progression there? So some of the planning is over the 4 years, and then so that's probably ongoing. But then again, maybe a year and a half out, you start looking at venues, and you start looking at logistics, and you start looking at, and then you drill down. Like, you really can't start preparing hands on for the World Cup until you get out of the Six Nations. So you've got this, and here's a crazy thing that doesn't happen now, which was a nightmare for us. In 2003 and 2007, we had to do a summer tour before the World Cup. So in 2003, we had to go to Perth and play Australia. Then we had to go to Tonga and play Tonga, and then on to Samoa to play Samoa. And then in 2007, we had to go to Argentina and play 2 tests in Argentina. Like, that was gotten rid of. And it was even a bigger disaster in 2007 because the World Cup had come forward a month. It started in September instead of October. That's all been cleared up now. So you take, say, for that time, you were trying to plan your run into the World Cup, you're trying to plan your warm-up games, you're trying to plan your fitness training, your rugby training, your squad camps, your periodizations. Like, yeah, it really ramps up, but it's very hard to kind of get 100% engaged with it. But you are ticking away at doing stuff that you can do. But it's not until after the Six Nations you can really say, okay, the next big thing is the World Cup. But you have a lot of stuff boxed away before that, and you have a lot of stuff lined up, and you have a lot of planning done. And then you have to be careful. If you have a crappy Six Nations, everyone gets nervous for the World Cup, you know. So you can't say, oh, well, whatever happens in the Six Nations happens. Well, no, that's not true. If you have bad Six Nations, everyone's up in arms, and you put pressure on the team. So, yeah, you've got to keep a lot of balls in the air. But at sometimes, some of the things you're juggling are more important than others, you know. But certainly, it's something that you go on for 4 years. But for sure, after the Six Nations, everything becomes very focused then, because the next time you're in action, you're in real action, you know.
Yeah, no, and just touching on the Irish squad, you had a huge amount of depth and talent and some big characters in the squad. And I imagine even going into these competitions.
Well, I would stop you there. We had a really good team, but if you look at our squad, there wasn't a huge amount of depth in our squads. For example, we had one tight head, John Hayes. That was it. Like, if anything happened to John, we were in big trouble. Like, and that's not being disrespectful to anybody else. He was our starting tight end. Raj was our starting 10 in 07. You know, in 03 we had Holmes, and Raj was pretty good. We were battling it out there. We were able to make strategic switches in games. So I think the reason for that is that if you look at the academy system at the moment, back in the noughties, the academies were just getting up and running. They're just getting started, and they were trying to put them in place and refine them and get the best out of the academies and connect and get the right guys in and get them on the right programs. Like, I was down in Cork there to start the Six Nations to see. I was covering the Italy game or something before the COVID, and I was looking at the Ireland team playing Italy. Like, and Jesus, they're huge men, the Irish lads. Like, they could play international in the morning. When I coached the under-20s back in '99, I was the under-20s coach. Fellas, you'd look at them and they know they got out of school last week. You know what I mean? So the academy system in the noughties wasn't firing on all cylinders. It was building towards that. So that's been a big thing that's changed, is that the caliber of guys coming through the academies is now much better. They're much more physically developed. They're much more mentally tough, and they know how to on a big occasion, and their skill set's better. So I think there's genuinely more depth now, and that's for the simple reason of all the work that's been done in the provinces and the academies, and by the IRFU. And that's not said often enough, but I think that's been a big change for Ireland. And when you have that sort of depth, we had a little bit of depth, let's be honest, but it wasn't the same level of depth that you would have now. And that's because, for no other reason, it wasn't anybody's fault. It was just that we weren't as developed in our academies. Our academy system wasn't as streamlined and as efficient. They were just finding their feet. And I think that is an important difference to point out, to be honest.
Yeah, I know that's fair. That's a fair point. And just with the trainings, obviously leading into these big competitions, and there's obviously a lot of competition for places up for grabs. How would you control it if it boiled over? Would you kind of leave it to the players, or would you kind of settle it down?
Well, you had to manage that space because you didn't go out every day and kick the lard out of each other because wasn't much value in that. But you would let the dogs out probably once a week, and if you came off a bad performance, you might leave more dogs out. But you do that early in the week, and sometimes that'd boil over. But to be fair to the guys, they knew. They monitored that themselves. Not saying there wasn't been the odd bust up, but the players would manage it, and then they'd shame the two guys who got into it, for doing something that's stupid. But yeah, because guys wanted to train hard. They knew what they were trying to do, and sometimes they knew it would boil over. Somebody might be hit late in the tackle and they'd react, but there was never any issue. I just think it's just part and parcel of the game, and I didn't have to worry about it. They knew, tell them the dogs are out today, and they'd get on with it. And if something boiled over, they'd be giving the guys stick on the bus going home for letting it happen, and we'd move on. It was all part of making sure we got everything right for next Saturday. That was what it was all about. When you're in camp, you have a game on a Saturday, nothing else matters. Believe it, you're in a tunnel, and it doesn't end until you walk get on the bus to leave the stadium after the game.
Eddie, as a head coach on match days, what's your role exactly? Is it a case of the work is done during the week and it's on to the players to get their own heads right, and you take a step back, or do you try and build a team up?
Well, you have a role. You can't disappear, What I would say, the general rule I used to play, which is hard, is shut up as much as possible, because guys, you can't play the game for the guys. You've got to, you stay in touch with them. What I would do is you would normally, our routine in the mornings was, depending on the kickoff time in the game, won't get into that in too much detail, but you would basically, before your pre-match meeting, we would go and the lads would throw some darts at the line out, and the backs would run around doing nothing. Then we come back to we grab our lunch, and then guys would get ready. We come down with a team meeting. I'd speak at the team meeting. And the players would have had a meeting the night before, a captain's meeting. I'd never go to the captain's meeting the night before. I never engaged in that. I let the captain take that meeting. So that I'd speak at that meeting, and then we get on the bus and go to the stadium, and then I'd stay out of their hair. Now, I might chat to guys, talk to Roger about the wind, or talk to somebody about something I need them to do. But it'd be one-on-one basis, or maybe encourage guys, say, listen, I can feel I'm a big one today and all this. So, but then the next time I'd address the team is before we left the changing room to go out in the field. And then again, I would leave the changing room and let them get the last bit themselves, that they had to really focus then. So you talk to them maybe twice, and you try to get a message across, but you try to really talk as little as you can, because you're only white noise at that point. And I always laugh. Someone used to say to me, "He's like, what's the last thing you said to the team before you left the change room in Croke Park before you played England?" And I'm going, "Geez, I haven't a clue," because if winning the game depended on that, we were screwed. What about all the work we've done all week? If one thing I say before we leave the change room is the difference between winning and losing, that's not really a good job preparing for it, is it? Because if I forget to say it, we're screwed. It's I'm a bit facetious, but you have to give players space and trust them, and they're professionals and they have their process. So try not to interfere with that. And the problem with the coach is you think you can add to this by talking. And you have to realise, no, at this point, if you're not redundant now, you've done a bad job preparing the team. Do you know what I mean? Now, you're not completely redundant, and then you've got to coach the game. You've got to get messages in. You've got to make substitutions. But you can't be the focus of attention. It's got to be the guys. And the captain often carries it from there, and he should. And that's where a good captain comes into his own,
Yeah, Eddie, just as you mentioned the England game in Croke Park, was the week of training, could you feel as a coach that building up, was it different any other week, or was it pretty much the same as normal?
I know it wasn't the same as normal. I mean, I think we did a good job at keeping that at bay for as long as possible. But the week of that game, once we came in, then you began to realise the importance of the game and how big it was historically. And that's fine, but that brings pressure. So, you know, players are under enough pressure playing a test game, especially a Six Nations game, especially a Six Nations game at home. So there's enough pressure on a team on an average Saturday in a Six Nations game. Now, this is another mountain of pressure on them. So you're trying to make sure you deal with that, because pressure just usually breaks you down if you don't deal with it. So that was my big concern. And we had lost to France in the first game in the last minute. And I was worried that, and we started badly against France. We were kind of watching France play for like 10 minutes instead of just getting into them. And my big fear was we would stand off England and they'd get a lead up and we'd spend the day trying to reel them in. And, you know, we nearly reeled France in, but in the end we didn't. And so my concern was making a start in the game and keeping their foot on the pedal and all that pressure. So it's funny, you make it for any game, you make a list of things you want to do, and they're not nebulous things like tackle hard. No, that means nothing. What you're talking about is that you set out kind of the what you call it, your victory conditions. If we do this, we do this, we do this, we do this. It could be like we want to do 95% of the line out. We want to do, you know, 10, 15, 20 impact tackles, so on. So you can measure them, but you set out your stall, and usually there's 6 or 7 things, you know, if we can do all these, it'll be a great performance. Now, you still might lose because the other team are actually very good as well. You could put in a performance against the All Blacks and still lose. You know what I mean? So, but you can only control your thing. So you win that performance. And often you come off after a game and you hit 4 or 5 of your goals and you still win. You know, you got there anyway. And sometimes if you drop down to 2 or 3, you probably don't win. And if you do, you're lucky. So the thing about that game in Croke Park for me was when we finished that game, when I look back at it, it was we ticked every box. You don't always do it, but we ticked every box that day. We set out, we do this. We did everything we said we'd do. And for the team to do that under that much pressure, to me, was hugely gratifying for them, because they were under savage pressure, given the occasion, the pressure that not a Six Nations game, but against England in Croke Park, and they still got the job done with flying colours. There wasn't like that, and they didn't do well. And for me, that's my memory of Croke Park, is the delivery of that performance by the team, given the pressure they were under. And for me, that's the most gratifying part of that.
Yeah, and a fantastic victory for Ireland that day, that's for sure, Eddie, and one that long live.
Well, I'd have taken 1-0 before the kickoff, but it went a bit better than
that. That's for sure. I think we all would have. But I suppose, look, Eddie, just the last question I kind of have from you, right? And just to kind of get away from rugby now, just kind of what are your own personal hobbies and interests, like just that you do to maybe switch off from it all at times?
Well, I try to, even when I was coaching, you have to switch off, because if you get sucked into the vortex. But I like things like, I like doing a bit of training. I've always trained PE background. I've always tried to do a bit of training. As you get older, that's harder, not because you don't want to, because bits start breaking down, like your shoulder gets sore, your hip gets sore. So, but you still keep it going. There's a guy who gave me one advice one time. It was the hook over it. It was the US Tommy Billups. He said, never get shut out. You know, that means no matter what it means, run up and down the stairs 10 times, don't get shut out, you know. So that was the advice he gave. It was good advice. Always do something, even if it's only walking out to the gate 10 times, you know. But anyway, so I always try and do a bit of that. And I like a bit of reading. And I watch sports, you know, and I like watching debates and stuff like that. It's interesting enough. I enjoy people debating. There's plenty of that going on at the moment. But yeah, so they're the things that I do. And yeah, I keep to myself a lot. I'm not a huge social guy. I've never been the guy to go to the pub every week. And I live in a village, a small village in the west of Ireland. And I think, you know, if I walked into the pub there, it'd be like a Western moment. Everyone would stop talking in the bar, you know, who's the stranger in town. Yeah. But like I don't socialise out a lot. Now, if I'm in Dublin meeting friends, I love to have beer with my buddies, but it would be very rare for me, you know. So yeah, I tend to keep to myself, and I enjoy that, and I enjoy reading, and as I say, I enjoy doing a bit of a workout and stuff like that. But that's really the size of it. I still love coaching though. Like I still love the I said, having the grass under your feet, you know, rather than, like, I enjoy the television stuff. I enjoy doing the analysis, and I enjoy the punditry. But I think it's still the most enjoyable thing for me is standing in the mud coaching. Like, that's where I started, and I like that more than anything. So that opportunity has eluded me for a while now. But look, it's like being in the movies. You know, you can only act in a movie if you get a call. You know.
Yeah, very good. That's the show. Very good. And finally, just for a bit of fun, right? We always finish off our show with a quick fire round of 10 short questions. So if you're up for it, we'll give it a go. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Why not?
Perfect. So, question 1: favorite food?
Wine and pasta. Why does the wine is first?
Yeah.
So if it's only one, the pasta goes.
Very good. Favorite movie?
Pulp Fiction.
Very good. Favorite sport other than rugby?
NFL.
Excellent. Sport.
You know what
hero?
NFL stands for, don't you?
Yeah. No.
Not for long.
Not for long.
Tough business. Yeah. Tough business.
Favorite sporting hero?
Well, this will sound like I'm jumping on the bandwagon, but it's Michael Jordan, and I followed Jordan for years. I got to watch some of his iconic games in America in the 90s when he was at the peak of his powers, because I was living there, and I love Jordan for no reason as a performer, in that he always embraced pressure.
Yeah.
And he didn't always deliver. He did miss shots to win the game on the buzzer, but he always went back and took the next shot if he had to, which is that's what I admire about Jordan, his ability to perform under pressure. I don't know the guy. I never got to meet him. You know, not many people do. But I'm not judging him as a person. I'm judging him as a phenomenal athlete. He seems like a nice guy as well. But that's by the way. Yeah,
you were very impressed with The Last Stand. So, or have you got a chance to see it? Or
yeah, I watched it. Yeah, it was very interesting insight, and I think it was interesting to see that he reviewed it. Looking back, and he might have changed his approach to dealing with guys. You know, he admits he was very hard on guys, and maybe there was times he was too hard on guys. But you could tell at the time in his head, like, it's easy to play Monday morning quarterback, you know, when you look back on things, you know, there's plenty of those out there anyway. But I think retrospectively he thought maybe he could have handled some situations differently. And he was, in the moment, he was probably too tough on guys. But look, as he said himself, look, that's where he was, and that's how he wanted to get the job done. So I respect that, you know.
Very good. So, sorry, next question. So favorite band or music artist?
Chris Isaak.
Very good. Last book you've read?
Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind by Yuval Noah Harari.
Wow. Favorite stadium?
Croke Park. It's a rugby stadium.
Oh, entirely up to you now.
Well, it was a rugby stadium, so there we go.
Perfect. Last minute try or last minute try saving tackle?
Well, last minute try for me is Shaggy's try in Twickenham in 06, you know, for the Triple Crown.
Yeah, unbelievable.
The big stretch.
Favourite sporting event you would like to attend?
You could probably tell me that's the Super Bowl, you know.
Super Bowl, yeah. And the last question, Eddie, favourite podcast?
Well, apart from my own, which is Eddie's Edge, which I'm now plugging, if you want to look it up. My favourite podcast, apart from my own, is The Rubin Report by Dave Rubin.
Very good. Excellent stuff. That's brilliant, Eddie.
Cheers, guys. Best of luck with everything.
Thanks a million. And look, I suppose from myself, Gary, and the rest of the extended panel, we'd like you to wish the best in the future and with your TV analysis career and whatever other opportunities you find yourself falling into.
Well, folks, thanks for listening. And that just about brings today's interview to a conclusion. I'm sure ye at home enjoyed Eddie's interview just as much as we did. And if you have any thoughts, questions or ideas, or would like to get in contact with the page, you can do so on Twitter or Instagram at Extended Panel. Make sure to drop us a follow if you're catching us on YouTube or Spotify. We have some more big guests in the coming weeks. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next Sunday with a brand new interview.